WWF Rage in Cage for the Sega CD. You know, that Genesis add-on that lets you play CDs and stuff. The thing was mostly known for having a bunch of really bad full-motion video-based video games, but there were a number of relatively decent games and a few rare gems within the console's library. Rage in the Cage fits into neither of those categories, but it's not too bad of a game. Let's check it out. Rage in the Cage is essentially a CD-ROM version of WWF Royal Rumble, which is essentially a follow-up to the initial WWF offering on 16-bit consoles, Super WrestleMania. You have a couple match types at your disposal. The standard one-fall match comprises two wrestlers competing in a regular match to score the winning pinfall. The game's Brawl Mode is essentially the same thing, except you can merely knock your opponent out for the win, and have access to illegal maneuvers such as choking and eye gouging. Nothing too special here. Of course, you have the tournament mode where you pick a wrestler and face off against the other wrestlers in the game to win the championship, or rather look at a brief video of your featured superstar. More on this later. The main draw of this game, as the title suggests, is the steel cage match, where both superstars find themselves within the confines of that classic blue bar cage. Obviously, the object of the match is to escape the cage before your opponent does. Sounds like a cinch, but one mistake can cost you the match before it even begins, so yeah. And that's about it for game modes. Only 3 match types. No Royal Rumble match, no Survivor Series match, not even regular tag team contests, which is awkward since we do have some actual dedicated tag teams in this game, such as the Nasty Boys, the Head Shrinkers, and Money Inc. Yeah, it's kind of awkward and a bit of a letdown, really. Imagine having a Royal Rumble match with 20 guys. It'd be a real treat back in those days. And yes, I said 20 WWF superstars at your disposal. Rage in the Cage's other main draw was its expanded talent roster. Aside from the aforementioned tag teams, you also had Bret Hitman Hart, Mr. Perfect, Shawn Michaels, the Macho Man Randy Savage, the Big Boss Man Kamala, among others. And each of them had their own little signature move that they could execute once they've beaten on their opponents quite a bit. Aside from that, however, all the wrestlers share the same moveset for the most part, and none of them played all too differently from each other to matter in the long run. Still, for the time, it must have been cool to have such a diverse selection of talent to play with in a video game. It's just too bad you didn't have much in terms of options. What's the point of having actual tag teams in a game if you're not going to put in any tag team matches? It's a bit of a letdown. The controls alright, I suppose. The 3-button controller is a bit of a hassle to work with in these games. Pressing B and C to grapple or that sort of thing, I don't remember the actual combination. Eventually, after a while, after a few playthroughs, you start getting used to it. But Rage in the Cage does support the 6-button controller, which does make life a bit easier by featuring its own grapple button and a couple other things. You can do signature moves with its own button, that sort of thing. I'm generally not a fan of the grapple tug-of-war system that they use in these games, since you're basically mashing buttons to fill a gauge, and once the gauge is filled, the move executes. And sometimes you're not really paying attention to what buttons you're mashing, so you're not going for the move that you're going for, that sort of thing. It's not completely crippled or anything. It works fine for what it is, so whatever. It's alright. Generally speaking, if you played the Genesis iterations of the WWF games, primarily Royal Rumble, there isn't a huge jump from that game to Rage in the Cage on Sega CD in terms of the visuals. The wrestler mugshots on the selection screens are still pretty grainy quality, and the in-game graphics don't show much of a considerable improvement to merit the jump to the CD-ROM format. Wrestlers still have this stilted animation style where every bit of motion is depicted in 3 or 4 frames. The energy meters and gauges have this pixelated gradient effect, which makes it difficult at times to determine whether you're winning the grapple tug-of-war. Looks alright for the most part, but this could have been done on Genesis. Maybe he's asking too much for the game's presentation to get at least a bit of a boost in the visuals, but at least it did added video clips to the game to justify the CD business or something. Yeah, about those video clips. They're really nothing more than quick black and white video with generic sounding cheers and jeers depending on the alignment of your chosen superstar. You can get these while on the selection screen, and you can also get an additional video clip of your featured superstar if you manage to defeat all 20 wrestlers in the game's tournament mode. But that's about it, really. Nothing to get excited over now, but back in the day, it was probably a neat thing to have. I wouldn't know though. I never had a Sega CD back in the day, and never knew anyone who did, but I digress. The one place the game does excel at over its cartridge brethren is the sound department. Although the music in Rage in the Cage is merely synthesized chiptunes as opposed to the actual wrestler theme music tracks that you'd hear in the arenas and stuff, they sound almost Super Nintendo-ish in terms of quality, so I guess it's a step up. Sound effects are also slightly better than on the Genesis games, almost clearer and crisper in quality, somewhat. But really, it's the voice bites that sweeten the deal. Each match is preceded with ring introductions performed by famed WWF ring announcer Howard Finkel,
The Undertaker!
And you also get quick pre-match taunts from each of the featured superstars.
Ooh, yeah! Power of power, too sweet to be sour, funky like a monkey. I'm the macho man and I'm gonna get you, yeah!
It's a really nice touch, although some taunts sound better than others.
When I'm done with you, you wish you were in the safety of a prison cell.
Even though it's still better voice acting than whatever you'd find in any recent WWE video game from the past 5 years. Maybe a little longer, but I digress. WWF Rage in the Cage is a bit of a mixed bag. It has a few high points with its expanded roster, the additional cage match, improved sound quality, and tremendous voice bites. Hey, you can never go wrong with a bit of Finkel in your game. But those high points are negated by the lack of variety in terms of game modes or match types, as well as the significant lack of any real updated visuals from its predecessors. It's just a CD-ROM version of Royal Rumble, except without the Rumble, or the tag team matches, or the Survivor Series, or Ric Flair. Also, I could have done without having to wrestle 19 matches in a tournament mode just to get a grainy video clip. Maybe half that number, or maybe implement a password to save your progress or something, but I don't know, whatever. It's not a bad game by any means, it's still pretty decent, and if you enjoyed the 16-bit efforts like Super WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, or Raw, you'll probably enjoy this one too. If you didn't care for those games, then this isn't going to change your mind one bit. For what little it offers, it's still decent. It's just not the be-all, end-all of 16-bit WWF games that some folks make it out to be, and you're not really missing out on much if you never get around to touching this one. Still, if you have a Sega CD or equivalent console, you'll like the aforementioned WWF games and find this laying around for a couple bucks, knock yourself out, why not? By the way, this is historic. This is the first Sega CD game that I reviewed that is actually pretty decent. Yay me. Good night.
From the Department of Correction in Cobb County, Georgia, weighing 337 pounds, the Big Boss Man.
If I could have a son as stupid as you, I'd have wished for cancer so I would die too.